In July 2015, the story of 68-year-old Tamara Samsonova from Dimitrova Street became a bestseller. The talk was about the possibility of a series of murders committed by a quiet pensioner. A few days later, the investigative committee cooled down the press hype, officially stating, in connection with the publications in various mass media about the information that Tamara Samsonova, the suspect in the murder of her acquaintance on July 23, 2015, allegedly committed a series of similar crimes, the main investigative directorate of the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation in St. Petersburg states that at the moment the investigation does not possess objective data about Samsonova's involvement in other murders. The investigation proceeded, and a forensic psychiatric examination found paranoid schizophrenia in Samsonova. In August 2016, the prosecutor's office recognized as lawful and justified the decision to refer Samsonova's case to court for the application of a medical measure of compulsory nature, in other words, for confinement in a psychiatric hospital under enhanced supervision. After the discovery of body parts wrapped in plastic curtains on a vacant lot near Building 10, Unit 4, on Dimitrova Street on the evening of July 26, 2015, Homicide Department operatives identified the suspect within a few hours. It turned out that the victim was 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, who lived in the building near where the remains were found. The 68-year-old Tamara Samsonova, who had an apartment in the neighboring building but lived with Ulanova, was suspected of committing the murder. Freshly cleaned blood traces, a missing bathroom curtain, and knives with traces of a brown substance provided a rough picture. Tamara Samsonova almost immediately confessed to poisoning Ulanova by mixing phenazepam into her food, then dismembering and scattering her parts in the vicinity. Initially, Samsonova claimed that another neighbor had helped her commit the murder, but the alleged accomplice was absent from the city at that time, and Samsonova admitted that she had fabricated this part of the testimony out of personal animosity. The excitement in law enforcement circles and the press began when one of the experienced investigators remembered that in 2003 he had to examine fragments of a male body on the territory of a nearby kindergarten, and the scene seemed familiar. Tamara Mitrofanovna readily confessed. There was a case. She had rented a room to a man in 2003, then poisoned him and disposed of the body. Operatives were able to find information about two more individuals who had presumably rented a room from Samsonova. And the pensioner stated they all became her victims, but the final resolution of the investigation remained focused on a single murder. Tamara Samsonova was born in 1947 in the city of Uzur, Krasnoyarsk Krai. Her father was a police officer who often left home with his weapon. Her mother worked somewhere in trade. After finishing school, she allegedly came to Moscow, enrolled in a foreign languages institute. I'll note that no diploma was found in Samsonova's apartment, but all her acquaintances emphasized that she could communicate fluently in English and German. After completing her studies, she worked as a foreign language teacher. She moved to Leningrad in 1971 to be with a man, from whom she quickly separated. She didn't work in her field of expertise, instead becoming a nurse in a hospital. In 1971, she married Leonid Samsonov and moved into his apartment on Dimitrova Street. After marriage, she worked as a floor monitor. She had no children. The first reliable information about Tamara Samsonova's life dates back to the 1990s. Investigators found a psychiatrist who had consulted her. Samsonova voluntarily visited the Social Psychological Assistance Office in 1996, along with her husband, who was still alive at the time. As the doctor noted, against the backdrop of the vibrant, lively, and knowledgeable Tamara, her husband seemed miserable, beaten down, and even somewhat mentally impaired. Despite her charm, Samsonova appeared to the specialist as stubborn, capricious, and whiny. Communication took place over the phone. The doctor visited Samsonova's apartment only once. He went there to borrow a book. This happened in the late 1990s. Her husband was no longer alive. This visit turned out to be the only one, and communication ceased afterward. The doctor is alive and continues to work, despite his advanced age. As the psychiatrist notes, Samsonova was even overly candid with him. For example, she mentioned committing thefts in stores frequently, but she was never caught. She talked about tenants whom she frequently changed. Specialist's description: an intelligent and secretive woman with a sophisticated intellect. Leonid Samsonov, born in the 47th year, worked at an auto repair plant. He appeared pale compared to his spouse. As Samsonova claimed during questioning, their relationship was good. I was like a mother to him, and he was like a son to me. He disappeared in the late 90s. The exact date is unknown, as his body has not been found to this day. Samsonova offered various versions in conversations with acquaintances: he left me, he died from liver cirrhosis, and the most common one: he went to the savings bank and never returned. Samsonova only reported her husband's disappearance to the investigative committee in 2015, when the head of the Social Security Department took her to the investigative department. During a search of Samsonova's apartment, documents belonging to her missing husband were found, including his passport and savings book. The question of whether she killed her husband was raised to Samsonova. While admitting to 4 deaths during the initial stages of the investigation, she consistently denied killing her husband. Vladimir moved in with Samsonova in the summer of 2001, renting one of the rooms. Despite the nearly 20-year age difference, his relationship with the landlady initially turned quite personal. A month or 2 later, as Vladimir told investigators, he ended the intimate relationship with Samsonova. In December 2001, he ended up in the hospital with poisoning symptoms. Doctors couldn't determine which specific substance had caused his health problems. After detoxification, there were no traces of poison left in his body. After being discharged from the hospital, Vladimir immediately moved out of Samsonova's apartment. He is alive and well to this day. The next tenant was less fortunate. A fragment of a male body with a shoulder tattoo was found by schoolchildren in the courtyard of a kindergarten on Kupchinskaya Street, Building 11, Unit 3, in the fall of 2003. The case remained unsolved at the time, and the identity of the deceased was never established. Other body parts, including limbs and the head, were not found. What was found was buried in an unmarked grave after a forensic examination. After Ulanova's murder, the case of a similar nature was remembered. The distance from Samsonova's home to the kindergarten was approximately 650 meters. Samsonova also recalled her tenant Sergei Podyanin, describing how she spiked his cold borscht with Radorm. She also mentioned the shoulder tattoo, a skull, a snake, and something else. While subsequently retracting several confessions of murders, she consistently maintained that she had killed Podyanin and Ulanova. However, she was not charged with these crimes. The decision of the investigation, approved by the prosecutor's office, is understandable. As shared by someone familiar with the investigative process during conversations with the criminal, when the grave with the corresponding number was exhumed, a female body was discovered. The correct burial was ultimately found, but an examination of the existing fragment of remains 13 years later did not help determine the cause of death in 2013. It was revealed that no analysis for substances that could indicate poisoning in the tissues of the body was conducted. Prosecutors didn't risk building charges solely on Samsonova's confession, which she could retract at any moment. Alexander Beryshev met Samsonova in 2003 by chance while walking on Sadovaya Street. He was with his common-law wife Larissa. Samsonova was with a man named Gennady. The couple started communicating. After a while, Samsonova reported that Gennady had died. He appeared to be around 40 years old. Initially, communication was mainly between Samsonova and Larissa, but gradually Beryshev started answering the phone more often. A year after meeting, as Larissa recounted, Beryshev announced that after 7 years of living together, he decided to leave Larissa and move to Samsonova in Kupchino. He called Larissa several times every 2 to 3 days after moving. The last call was a week later, and the conversation abruptly ended. No one else saw Alexander alive or dead after that. According to Larissa's claims, the man had very warm relationships with his sister's family, especially with his nephew. This nephew visited Larissa and tried to find out what happened to his uncle, but couldn't find any traces. Immediately after Samsonova's arrest, she gave statements admitting to killing Beryshev, but later retracted her words. "I was joking," the grandmother said. "Who is this Gennady? Is he alive? And if he's dead, what was the cause?" Unknown. According to the official version, which Samsonova also supports, she poisoned Ulanova with phenazepam, and when she died, she dismembered her. 50 crushed tablets were added to the store-bought Olivier salad. Alcohol was served at the meal, but phenazepam was not added to the alcohol. However, according to the results of the forensic examination, no phenazepam was detected in the discovered fragments of remains, and the deceased did not consume alcohol before death. The conclusion is cautious. The absence of the ability to conduct forensic chemical analysis of biological fluids and internal organs, including the stomach, of the unknown woman doesn't allow confirming or disproving the possibility of her consuming chemical substances, including phenazepam, during her lifetime. Another oddity is the fact of lethal phenazepam poisoning. According to specialists' conclusion, introducing 50 tablets is required for death. Samsonova also mentioned this in her testimonies. The taste of the Olivier salad with such an amount of the substance added isn't discussed. In documents, experts wrote, "Cause of death not determined," meaning the fact of murder is based solely on Samsonova's confession. Samsonova recorded her thoughts in a notebook for several years, using several languages interchangeably to prevent anyone from understanding. As detectives said, encrypted notes contained hints about a dozen murders in the summer of 2015. Later, this information was deemed inaccurate, and the possibility of a serial maniac in Cappuccino was denied. The suspect was explained that they were referring to law enforcement officers. In her diary, there are entries over many years about Samsonova seeking powerful drugs. It was noted, "I'm buying 6 boxes. It costs 410 rubles. I have 2 more bars, now I have enough. I have 17 of them. When buying medicine, 12 remained." Tatiana Mitrofanovna herself did not take these medications. For many years, she went to bed around 9 p.m. and woke up at 3 a.m. refreshed and alert. It was assumed that the drugs were needed to sedate potential victims. Today, the investigation agrees with Samsonova's version, stating that she would get drugs for her neighbors. They even found one neighbor to whom Samsonova once gave a package of phenazepam. However, where the remaining mentioned packages were used is unknown. The course of action chosen by the investigation is optimal for everyone. The grandmother will presumably be placed under strict medical supervision in specialized institutions until the end of her life. Since 2 or 3 more murders discussed after the arrest cannot be proven, there is no need to talk about them, especially not to stir up excitement. Otherwise, we might end up with a serial maniac who operated in St. Petersburg for about 15 years. Leonid Samsonov, Alexander Beryshev, and Sergei Podyanin have no relatives who would be banging on the doors of law enforcement, demanding to find and punish. Who the supposed deceased Gennady is remains entirely unknown. Similarly, the names and fates of other tenants of the grandmother are unknown, as reported by Samsonova's defense attorney, Konstantin Sazonov. The defense also agrees with the position of the investigation. My client insists on her confession to Ulanova's murder. We agree with the conclusions of the forensic psychiatric examination regarding Samsonova's condition. The decision to refer the case to court for the application of compulsory medical measures is considered legal and justified. Some details remain unresolved, such as where Ulanova's head is, and generally all the limbs of Ulanova and Sergei Podyanin. Where are the bodies of Leonid Samsonov and Alexander Beryshev? The entire process of removing Ulanova's body from the apartment is captured by a security camera in the hallway, making it clear that Samsonova couldn't have taken the evidence far. The most likely scenario is the Volkovsky Canal, which runs alongside the railway tracks. The path to it is short, about 300 meters. Large-scale searches in it were not organized because the cost of excavators turned out to be too high. The canal has not been cleaned since around 2000, about the same time Samsonova is thought to have been active. When it comes to work in this water body, surprises may emerge.